Hello and welcome to another episode of Nothing Ventured with me, Aarish. Today, via Zoom, I have with me Emmet King. Emmet is the founding partner at J12 Ventures, an early-stage VC firm operating out of Stockholm, London, and Paris. J12 backs pre-seed and seed founders across Europe at the frontier of AI, both AI enablement and B2B applications embedded in real workflows. Emmet's journey runs from operator to angel, co-founder at Nowo, DHS alumni syndicate, to institutional VC with a portfolio including fingerprints across industrial computer vision, digital ID, primary research, and music rights. In today's episode, we talk about how the Nordics have an advantage in the application layer of AI.
The Nordics as an ecosystem has a great number of strengths, and particularly I would say when it comes to the application of AI in certain areas.
Why Nordic design is a real thing and how it translates into tech.
The Nordics has always proved itself really capable when it comes to packaging technology, so kind of building product. I mean, Nordic design is the real thing in furniture or whatever it may be. But
how the law of Jante might have held founders back, but not anymore, and why it is absolutely rational for AI labs to be investing into infrastructure.
Yeah, there's obviously a huge amount of CapEx investment for AI infrastructure build out. The numbers are phenomenally large. I think there's a lot of rationality in that build out.
Whether we're seeing a wave of application layer write downs and whether AI will ever be able to capture context fully.
The more data and wider workflow that they kind of can get a grip of, the more context they have. And again, I think, the more value that they can deliver.
And finally, why trust is fundamental for AI applications to win.
Establishing trust in their segment is super important.
Let's get straight into it. Hi there. Whilst I've got you for a second, I thought I'd reintroduce myself. My name is Aarish. I am the host of Nothing Ventured, the podcast where I talk to the people behind the stories that make the venture ecosystem go round. I'm also the founder of Emerge One, a consultancy that provides fractional CFO support to venture-backed tech startups from seed to Series B and beyond. If you enjoy the podcast, we would really appreciate it if you could rate, like, and subscribe wherever it is that you listen. And if there's anything you'd like to chat to me about, whether that's something to do with the podcast or indeed a guest that you'd like to recommend, do reach out to me on LinkedIn or on X. I'm always up for a bit of a chat. Right, let's get straight back into it. Emmet, thank you so much for joining me today. Real pleasure to have you. And actually, as this is one of the last podcasts as we close off the season, I think we've got some really interesting stuff to talk about, but really excited to have you here with me today.
Really appreciate you having me on and very much looking forward to having a good chat.
Okay, awesome. Well, let's dive straight in, right? So the Nordics punch well above their weight in the European venture ecosystem, but outside of slush, they maybe don't get the most amount of press or PR maybe, and beyond kind of unicorns per capita, what are the systemic advantages that you actually see on the ground, whether that's industrial heritage, free education, risk safety net, or product discipline, and what are the real handicaps conversely? So you talk about the law of Jantelagen, and shallow late stage capital that still hold founders back in the Nordics from your viewpoint.
Yeah. No, exactly. I mean, I think the Nordics as an ecosystem has a great number of strengths, and particularly, I would say when it comes to the application of AI in certain areas, we don't have the model layer talent that you might find in the UK, where you have DeepMind, in France, where you have Mistral, and you have a lot of researchers contributing to Meta and large US labs. So I think there are different opportunities to be at the forefront of maybe different parts of the AI stack in other parts of Europe. But in the Nordics, I think we have a really, really strong potential to lead on various applications of AI. And part of that is what you alluded to. I mean, there's a really deep industrial heritage, and also kind of frontier companies across a range of industries. So not only in machinery and manufacturing with companies like ABB and Atlas Copco and SKF and Sandvik in mining, and these kind of companies, leading automotive like Volvo and Saab and Scania and
Mm.
these kind of companies, leading retail with H&M and IKEA and kind of those sorts of firms. Yeah, if you look in Denmark, you have the biggest logistics companies in the world, like Maersk, the biggest pharma and biotech, like Novo Nordics. So you have huge companies at the forefront of a number of industries. So that means that there's deep domain knowledge around how to apply new frontier technology to a number of really large spaces, and that's a huge advantage. I think in addition, the Nordics has always proved itself really capable when it comes to packaging technology, so kind of building product. I mean, Nordic design
Mm.
is the real thing in furniture
Yeah.
or whatever it may
My
be.
my
But I
wife
think that,
is my wife is an interior designer, and like Scandi is pretty up there. I mean, it battles with her Italian instincts, but yeah, for sure.
yeah, and then it becomes Japandi or whatever the fusions are that
Yeah,
come.
sure.
But Nordic design is a real thing, and I think that also translates into tech and product. And I mean, a lot of the winners that have come from this space, from this geography previously, have been, I guess, on the consumer side, also with companies like Spotify and
Mm.
Skype and Klarna, and gaming giants like King and Supercell, and health tech on the consumer side, like Cree, as they're known in the Nordics, but Livy,
Yeah,
as they're known in the UK. So there's I think really strong ability to understand user behaviors and design for it. So that, combined with deep domain knowledge in various sectors and people that work at the forefront of some of the world's largest companies in those sectors, is a great fusion for building application layer technology. And I think that's always been a strength, and is a strength now as we go into, yeah, kind of more of an AI era.
well,
And of
especially
course, I
because
mean,
the winners in AI so far, like if you think about OpenAI, specifically ChatGPT, the whole explosion of AI was the consumer facing chatbot, essentially, right? Like the ability to distribute to consumers. That's what has led to this massive explosion. And so I guess what you're saying is the fact that the Nordics have this like very deep expertise in kind of consumer facing design, that should give them a really strong edge in that application layer, right?
exactly. And I mean, B2B applications as well are, it's a human on the other
Yeah,
end of things. So that kind of consumer excellence is kind of the far end of maybe the spectrum of where product needs to excel, and then kind of bring that back if you're in retail or a lot of manufacturing use cases or logistics, or yeah, whatever industrial settings you might be. You're also going to have the need to design and understand users and workflows really strongly. And I mean, we see, two of Europe's biggest kind of breakout companies in the last couple of years are companies like Lovable and
mm,
Legora,
mm,
that are from Stockholm, and kind of really, I think their success is and will continue to be built on fantastic user experiences. I mean, one is, to build applications with AI and the simplicity with which you can do that. And a lot of that is tech, but a lot of that is kind of product and design as
sure.
well. And then Legora kind of bringing frontier technology to the workflows of a conservative industry like the legal space,
Mm,
is also, a lot about understanding workflows and behavior, and how to embed and integrate that product into the day-to-day of legal professionals. So I think that product heritage is a real advantage. And then, of course, every ecosystem like the Nordics or wherever needs to have had prior successes that build this flywheel of talent and, you know knowledge and capital that knows how to create breakout companies. And yeah, there's enough waves of those that seem to continue to create new waves. And I guess another structural advantage, if that was kind of where the question was initially pointing, is, I mean, the small markets enable companies building here to really have a global mindset from day one. So there's a quick move to compete on a global level, whereas you might see companies that are born in larger domestic markets stay there for a longer period of time before looking to make the next move. So that surely helps. People need to understand how they can be globally relevant very quickly.
Yeah, I think that's super interesting, that kind of thinking around constrained market, right? Like, so exactly to your point, if you know that you can only reach an addressable market of, I don't know, 3 million in your domestic market, that forces you, if you are trying to build something, truly generational, it forces you to start looking very quickly at those other markets and potentially, localizing them as quickly as possible, or even starting with that end goal in mind, i.e. use your domestic market as a test bed, hone the product, but essentially the product's always a global product. The other side of that question, as I mentioned, was like, what are the things that you think hold it back? Like, as I said, I get, and maybe it's because sitting in the UK, you maybe just, we maybe just get less press. I mean, not everyone is all over the kind of venture media ecosystem, but you hear about Slush, you hear about, obviously, the Spotifys and the Skypes and the Levels of the world, but everyone points in them as European first rather than maybe Nordic first, right? So what are the things that do you feel are maybe not even handicaps, but maybe are pulling back founders from really exploiting those advantages that you talked about earlier?
Yeah, I mean, I think you mentioned in the question originally this law of Jante, kind of cultural phenomenon, which I guess is maybe more of a thing of the past, but I guess it persists to some extent, this unwritten cultural code of discouraging individual boasting or kind of standing out or excessive ambition that kind of sticks out from the crowd, kind of, etc. Which in many ways I think is going away, and new generations are kind of further from where that may have been a bit more prevalent within culture some time ago. But it's a very different kind of standing point or starting point than maybe the American dream kind of generalization of a culture. So I think, yeah, and it's often talked about, in addition to that, also across Europe, kind of the acceptance of failure being not as high or widely acceptable as maybe in other markets and cultures. And so I think some of those things may still be disadvantageous in the Nordics and much of Europe, that failure isn't celebrated, that ambition isn't as encouraged. But as I said, I think there's a real, I think the last few years you can feel even in the water that there's a real turning of the tides, where actually ambition is highly celebrated and individual excellence is also celebrated, and failure also. So I think Europe as a whole is moving closer to enabling that kind of risk taking on a cultural level.
Yeah, I think that's also in somewhat powered by some of the anti-European rhetoric that comes out, like especially on X, Twitter, and elsewhere, where the US is kind of constantly bagging on Europe for taking too many holidays and not working hard enough and not being ambitious enough and so on. And so you've got this whole swathe of, both entrepreneurs and investors, so the likes of Harry Stebbings, obviously. You've got Andrea Klinger from promoting this idea of Europe Inc. Alex McDonald, who's a friend of mine, obviously also quite sort of heavily involved in this sort of promotion. And we've seen new kind of media platforms like ETN swinging up over the last year, really, where the goal is to really promote the strengths of the European ecosystem. And I think, to your point, we in Europe are very good at navel gazing and sort of looking at our past our past and sort of saying, well, we haven't really been that good, so let's give up, rather than sort of looking at saying, okay, what are the opportunities that we can learn from? And frankly, Europe has a huge amount that we can learn from. I was talking to someone recently, about the German ecosystem and how precision engineering in Germany and Italy is still best in class, best in the world, right? And so therefore the opportunities to kind of hone that further and leverage those skill sets is still very much there. And I think, yeah, exactly to your point, I think we are breaking out of this almost fear of standing out, right? Like the contrary to the law of Jante, where, and I would say that's a very Northern European thing in any case, right? The UK suffers from it as much as anywhere else. No one sort of sticks their head above the parapet. But I think, and often that's because of fear of being shot down, but I think that's happening less and less. And I think people are more and more comfortable about saying, no, actually, yeah, we're European, we're great. Lovable very clearly has come out saying, we want to, list in Europe, we want to build in Europe. This is where we are. We're a European company. And I think, if we have champions like that, then I think more and more founders will join, join that rally and move forward. So yeah, I think there's a lot to be optimistic about. I want to kind of pivot, switch tack a little bit, talk about AI, right? Especially given lots of the stuff we're seeing more globally at the moment as well. So, infrastructure spend it looks rational until really it isn't. Where do you think those cracks show first, right? So we see circularly financed GPU builds or SaaS adjacent AI apps with soft retention. But what would a healthy reset for AI look like, especially in Europe? And who do you think would benefit when that happens? Or do you think we'll continue to play kind of musical chairs for a little while longer? And I guess the context of this is as much as anything else. I did a news episode a couple of weeks ago, and over 50%, I think over 50% of total venture dollars in Q3 went to 18 companies. And most of those would have, and the majority of that would have been sort of foundational models. So I think you had big rounds with XAI and OpenAI and then Mistral, etc. So yeah, so how, do you? I guess the preface to this question maybe is, do you think we are in a bubble, which seems to be more and more talked about, and if so, what does that reset look like, and how do you think that plays out in Europe?
Yeah, it's much discussed for sure. I think you pointed to kind of different parts of the AI ecosystem already, and there's obviously a huge amount of capex investment for AI infrastructure build out. The numbers are phenomenally large. I think there's a lot of rationality in that build out. I think I would believe in the long-term value of what we can realize when it comes to productivity and kind of AI driven products and the infra that needs to run on. So the build out has to precede the realization of that value. And I think the rational thing for the big labs in the US is to be investing heavily. Today, despite there being some circular dealings, the majority of that investment is still being made from the strong cash positions of very profitable, very large companies. I think as profits would be seen to fall, as investment would be seen to shift to more kind of debt financed and more of those circular dealings kind of take a larger share, then I think those should be some kind of stronger warning signals. But then where I think we'll see certainly a nearer term kind of correction is really on a lot of application layer AI, where I think there's been a lot of inflated valuations where hype and expectation is far exceeding reality, high multiples on low revenues, and where I think we'll see kind of probably in the near term, there'll be the first wave of companies that were very well funded 1-2 years back off the back of some very fast growth. but now we're kind of, with the market a little bit more visible, their growth is probably stalled, their churn is probably significant, the defensibility that they hoped to kind of build into has maybe not materialized, and there'll be some investors counting some of their first kind of losses of this wave of rush to invest in AI. And I think that will also, maybe look like whether that's looking like a slight deflation or bubble bursting or correction or whatever terminology. I think we'll see a lot of AI app kind of write downs. And that may also, affect investor sentiment to a significant degree.
Well, we're going to talk about that in a bit more detail in a second, but actually a lot of what you said ties into, some other things that we're seeing, right, in general across venture. So, Sifted just released a piece back by PitchBook data showing, VC funds have raised 60% less funds in Europe versus the same period last year. So year to end of November, I think. So there's less capital, and the capital there is seems to be flowing into much more concentrated bets. So to your point, we had this Cambrian explosion of application layer AI products. That a lot of those are now shaking out of the system, right? And then you're hopefully going to be left with the sort of companies that really are viable. And after this sort of exuberant spate of funding into these various applications, like I think maybe what we'll see is the reset looks like it's much more certain rather than opportunistic. So VC funds will probably flow into those companies where those models, the applications, the use case, right, and the problem that they're trying to solve is better understood, as it has always been the case, right, with SaaS and so on, right, like into the businesses that actually have a business case, right, rather than being just interesting projects, and I guess that really does lead into this sort of next question, which is that general models are eating features, right? Like every time there's a new release from X or Claude or Anthropic or OpenAI or whoever, a whole wave of application layer products potentially kind of, face an existential threat. So what has to be true in 2026, do you think, for an application layer AI company to survive? Is it the kind of proprietary data access? Is it workflow depth? Is it regulated domain know-how, distribution? Is it vertical models? Or is it like something else altogether? I'd love to understand kind of what you think about in terms of underwriting these businesses, and maybe an example that, would fail to pass your checklist.
Yeah. So when we look to invest in applications of AI, we're definitely drawn to companies that are quite verticalized, so addressing specific workflows, specific industries, because then they typically have more of the characteristics that we look for, which would be proprietary data, as you also mentioned. So kind of working with specialized domain data and ideally having products that generate valuable data through their own usage as well. So usage and distribution will, widen the moat of proprietary data that kind of builds more accurate intelligence, more context, more better ability to deliver value. In addition to proprietary data, I mean, we like the applications that have, as I said, workflow depth. So specific workflows, specific industries, depth of integrations with other systems being used, that can understand the workflow and how it spans from one user across users, in a company. Because these things enable an application to have a fuller context. The more data and wider workflow that they kind of can get a grip of, the more context they have. And again, I think, the more value that they can deliver. Like a human that understands, that is a domain specialist, understanding the wider reach of what they do in a company, rather than only understanding the specific tasks that they've
So,
been tasked with.
so this is a really interesting topic for me, especially because it's one that we think about kind of in the world of finance and the work we do as CFOs and so on, which is, everybody keeps trying to create a killer strategic finance app, whether that's financial modeling or whether that's, more data insight or, decision making support, etc. But the thing that I think always gets lost in that conversation is that AI inherently and cannot have access to everything, right? It can't have access to all the context that's going on in a business. And I think you're talking about the more it can plug into the workflows within a business, hopefully the more context it has. But for example, when you are making a decision about, I don't know, headcount reduction or growth, or if you're making taking a bet on geographical expansion, et cetera, a lot of these are not necessarily, I mean, there will be data driving that to some extent, but some of these are also calculated bets, right? And the context of those calculated bets happens outside of the data that sort of sits within the business, right? It may well be conversations that you're having with investors or clients or customers, et cetera, which aren't necessarily being captured by that AI. So I'd love to understand how you think, whether you think that is something that will evolve, and I'm not entirely sure how it could evolve, but and to your point, if context is so critical, right? Like if I'm a business, am I willing to give essentially access across the board to all of my workflows, applications, data, knowledge, etc., and therefore the inherent security issues that come with that, and the data protection issues, and so on and so forth. And so, do you think that there is kind of this natural limiting factor with some of these AI products where it just simply can't capture enough context, and therefore it can get to good but not good enough?
I think there will be ability to capture more context than we can today through, I mean, as you said, there's a lot of context that lives in conversations and other, documents and things. And I think over time we'll see people trying to capture all of that data. So, recording the meetings, and even if they're in person, and, assimilating other documents that maybe haven't seemed to be the most relevant to a use case today, but do have some added context, and kind of, absorbing them into a use case as well. But I think we're some way off from kind of, applications of AI and agentic systems from having the full context to automate full complex workflows. So I think it's for a long time, whether you want to call it good but not good enough, or whether we call it, being extremely effective co-workers that still coexist next to humans that have additional context and understanding, that is too difficult to transfer to AI at the moment. I think that's where we're gonna exist for a long time. I don't think we can give the full context and trust kind of full end-to-end complex workflows, but finding the ways in which to, and this is, other strengths of AI application companies, finding the ways in which to guardrail intelligence to do what parts of which workflows alongside humans that are working in those functions as well. How to design products such that human AI interaction is what it should be. What it should be in terms of how does a human want to interact with that intelligence? How do they get the most value from it? What does the interface or frequency of interaction look like? So I think, another characteristic of AI application winners will be product excellence
Mm.
and kind of getting all of that right, the packaging of the technology and how humans should interact with it within the context of a complex workflow is no easy feat.
And probably, I mean, there's a couple of things here. Probably goes beyond the software element, right? But also touches on the hardware because, for example, we've seen things like the pin that came out that, you know, in theory, people are going to walk around with this AI that would essentially capture everything around them. But from a user perspective, that's just not a particularly great piece of hardware to be carrying around with you, right? Or it automatically will change the nature of the conversation because you automatically know that you know you're being recorded or whatever, right? So I think there's that. I think the argument, or not the argument, I think the reality that we are going to see augmented, AI as an augmentation of human work rather than a replacer of human work for certainly, I mean, 5 years, 10 years, I don't know, right? Like whatever the number ends up being, but certainly for a decent amount of time, I think is spot on. I think, this, and it's what I say to my kids all the time, don't think about AI as replacing you and therefore like, how do I fight against it? It's like, okay, how do I use it so that when I, end up in a career or whatever, I'm going to have an advantage against the next person who hasn't used it or, or doesn't know how. But yeah, I think part of this is, we think about AI in the software context, but I think we've got to look at it in the hardware context as well, from that product packaging kind of perspective that you've talked about earlier. I mean, I'm interested to understand whether you've seen any of that already kind of come across your inbox yet.
Yeah, actually, I mean, there's one thing that I think is quite interesting that I'm looking at the moment. Um, I don't believe in, maybe they'll come back, the pins and the other kind of, I think we just don't have the trust
Yeah,
in the technology yet to
yeah.
capture just kind of an ambient capturing of everything going on, especially when it's visual data. I think, I'm sure we'll cross that line where it's just accepted and it's done, but we're not there yet. But yeah, some Black Mirror style future where just everything is captured is probably where we're gonna get. But no, the one that I like, I'm looking at right at the moment, and I'm not sure I should that I should kind of explicitly state what they're doing.
Ah, such a shame.
But if and when it's a part of the portfolio, then I'll come back here and I'll tell you about it.
Amazing. Okay, fine. But I mean, like, so you are seeing stuff, I guess, is the point, right? Which means that people are starting to think about how to. I mean, obviously they have been, but
Absolutely. So I think not only from a kind of human like consumer hardware perspective, but I think we also see a lot. And where I'm very excited is kind of in industrial settings. I mean, there's more
yeah.
sensors, more cameras that are more capable, lower cost, capturing more data than ever before. Because yeah, one, the hardware is better and cheaper, and two, there's more that can be done with the data that is captured. So I think there you're seeing examples of kind of richer streams of data capture to automate processes or orchestrate across processes and different hardware and these things. So I think that's one setting that's further ahead and seeing that. I think when it comes to more the professional services or consumer side of things, I mean, we already see just a new level of data capture from like meetings,
Mm,
note takers, and these things. So I think, um, you know, and you see it in healthcare with ambient scribes for doctor's appointments in order to capture, real world interactions in a way that wasn't done before. So I think you already see the seeds of, how that starts in a few use cases, but then will become prevalent probably to any professional meeting that you would have, or you know, deeper, we already see data being understood and made use of within your inbox that was not touched before. So I think everywhere where context sits is starting to get kind of, captured in some ways.
Yeah.
It's just not all together yet.
And it's almost certainly going to be the case in the way we've seen, play out with software time and time again. The initial use case for the hardware probably won't be the end use case, right? Like, I mean, to your point, it may start off as something that captures doctor's notes or ambient information from patients or whatever during a consult, and it may end up being, essentially the gold standard for meetings, right? or whatever, right? So I think this is the interesting thing, and has been for the last couple of years, and which is why, like, whether or not these companies that go fall to the wayside within this Cambrian explosion we've seen over the last couple of years, I don't think that there's any bad thing, because I think inherently they will have explored avenues that were still valuable to explore. And it may well be that, again, as the technology develops, as the hardware develops, as the as people's acceptance and that trust, and I think trust is really the implicit word there, right? Like, I still know many people that either don't trust AI at all, or even founders, for example, that will only trust, let's say, XAI and won't trust OpenAI, right? And so, and in fact, recently my trust in OpenAI and ChatGPT dropped somewhat, because I opened it up and there was a banner saying, we can help you with your Christmas shopping or something along those lines, right? And it was very like, okay, hold on, you're now moving me to a Googleized kind of I'm the product rather than the product being the product. So that I think that trust question is the one that, once that is accepted or that trust has been built, then we'll see more.
Yeah. And I think trust is super important. We talk about it often for, back to the question of how AI apps survive or win. Establishing trust in their segment is super important, because I think, if you're selling an advanced AI solution to whatever workflow or industry, you're selling, in some respects, kind of transformation of those processes. And transformation requires trust to a much greater degree than if you were selling SaaS a few years ago, and you're essentially selling a tool that can be pretty well controlled and understood by all of its users. So to get people to kind of choose you as a vendor amongst a sea of AI noise, and believe in the value you can provide by kind of disrupting the way that they've been doing things, and doing so with the technology that they don't fully understand and isn't always fully kind of transparent in the way that it reaches its conclusions. It requires a lot of trust. So you can see companies that do a good job in establishing that trust through brand, or I think it's one of the reasons why the quest to win mind share very early in different segments is is kind of seen, and a lot of money is thrown at companies to become the category that they're trying to build, because that's it's one way to kind of establish trust.
And the other way is distribution, right? Like, I mean, Google with Gemini, and you've now got lots of people kind of out there saying, wow, Gemini is winning the game right now. Kind of this sleeping giant that for the last couple of years was kind of, I don't know if discount is the right word, but people were kind of slightly dismissive of it. And now they're like, wow, okay, Gemini is, 10x better than the other sort of LLMs that are out there. And the point again is that Google has the distribution. I mean, it's the same reason, Teams beats Slack every day of the week, because enterprise runs on Microsoft, and or has done traditionally for many years, and they have the distribution and they can bake in their app. So I think it's a combination of who is trustworthy or who has built the trust, but also who has the reach. And often the reason they have the reach is because they have the trust, right?
Yeah. And to the question of kind of how AI apps survive, I mean, distribution is probably the biggest thing that they need to either overcome or build for themselves. So I mean, most startups are kind of on a very simple level fighting the battle of, can the innovation of a new company beat the distribution of whatever incumbents
Yeah.
exist in its space? And we often like companies that are building in verticals that are maybe more characterized by legacy software rather than more kind of recently venture-backed tech
Mm.
winners that
Mm.
maybe have both distribution and still pretty technically capable and innovative enough to kind of move with where the world is going. There's generally quite good crossover with the other characteristics mentioned around kind of uh, complexity and proprietary data and domain
Yeah.
knowledge or regulated environments, etc. Those things have, generally kept tech out for some time, but now I think the opportunity is tech can get there, and nobody owns distribution as much as in other verticals. And as you said, I think the likes of Google, Microsoft, they've not needed to be the first to roll out advanced features
Mm.
because they know they have the distribution, they know they have the trust, and they know they don't want to break it. So they need their models, Gemini, to get good enough to say, okay, now we roll
We
out
roll it out.
features
Yeah.
across the suite. And that's going to be dangerous to players that have been providing productivity tooling and growing because they've been kind of alone there, but now those with distribution catch up. And if you don't manage to scale fast enough to have enough distribution yourself, or excel on products such that people will still choose to have you outside of the suite because what you offer is so delightful or uniquely valuable that it's still worth adding on, then it's going to be rough waters for quite a lot of those.
Yeah. I think the other side of that is also, companies that have done very well with productivity, et cetera, or whatever it might be, who then start over, essentially you get feature creep, right? So like the thing that I've noticed is I use Granola for my note taking, and now I keep getting a banner from Notion that wants to force me to use its note capturing kind of technology, but I've already got my workflows built around using Granola or in other cases other tech, whatever it is. And I think there is actually, I think we're in a place where trying to over productize and embed newer and newer features just because it's AI may end up being detrimental to some of these legacy businesses because it takes them away from what their core focus always was.
Yeah, yeah, no, 100%. I think that's a really interesting kind of strategic focus question for those. I guess it can be a curse as well as a blessing to have distribution
Yeah.
because either it's your strength or it adds noise, and you try to, yeah, add a lot of features to retain more of that value there rather than focusing on maybe what initially kind of was the value that you delivered to them and allowed to acquire all of those customers. So I think Granola is a fantastic example, and I am a big fan because like we've stayed away from the general note takers and productivity kind of apps because of a lot of the reasons that I've been talking about. Our preference is the more, yeah, domain specific proprietary data, etc., etc. And I think companies like that are at risk of, as we said, the Google note takers, the others. But I think they are so good so far on product and experience for that function that I think they have a chance of carving out kind of a best in breed positioning
Yeah.
there. And sure, a lot of enterprise is going to stay in its Microsoft suite, but there's a big segment that is below that enterprise size that is maybe going to want to have just the best note taker, even though it lives outside of what they're using for their digital meetings. And I'd been kind of, my attention had gone from Granola to Fix AI has a note taker, and I was using that a bit more. And now Granola has its end of year wrapped
Yeah.
kind of summary. And I thought it was such a nice feature, and actually it really understood a lot of the context of what the
Yeah, it
meetings
was
were
quite
about
surprising.
in the way that it kind of delivered the highlights back. And I thought, actually it is better than the others. It does have a better understanding. It does have some features that the others don't have. And so I think I continue to get enough value out of it to not just revert back to the default. But so I watched kind of the development of both my usage there and its position in that kind of very competitive space, where some of the players do have a lot of distribution, with a lot of interest. Because yeah, I think it's an example where of these characteristics that we've mentioned. I think the product excellence
Yeah.
is probably the one that has to just far exceed the rest, because the others aren't as kind of prevalent, or the proprietary data or complexity, or these things, and they have to build their own distribution. So it's really on the product that they have to stand out.
I actually think, I mean, like, just to wrap up on granola, and then we'll get on to the next question. But I think one of
So
the things,
in my summary, it did describe me as a massive advocate and evangelist of granola, because I referred it to the whole team after that, and now I'm doing it again. So I expect a free subscription next year.
yeah, I'm gonna have to get them on the pod. No, but I mean, one of the things that I think was the smartest thing that they did was that it sits outside of your meeting app, right? Like, so one of the things that turns me off immediately is when I see a Fireflies or an Otter or a Gemini sitting in my meeting, because your behavior changes immediately. Whereas when the app sits outside, and again, this comes back to trust and user behavior and all the rest of it, right? Like, you can still tell people that you're recording on Granola, but they're less conscious of it because it's not just sitting there in a window on your on your Google Meet or your Zoom call or whatever, right? So I think that's been really smart. I mean, the challenge there is, of course, making sure that people are announcing that they are recording every time that they're using it. But I think it is small things like that where you really understand human behavior, and I don't know that that's why they built it in that particular way, but it certainly feels to me like a feature, right? Like an actual feature is the fact that it doesn't sit inside your meetings.
I could talk about granola all day, but we should
probably not. Or maybe we can another time. We'll get them on, and we'll get you to interview them. Okay, so I'm going to put you on the spot for the last question, and I'd love for you to name kind of one AI segment that you think is going to go to zero, one that consolidates maybe to 2 or 3 winners, and I think we probably talked about the answer to one of those with with these note takers, and kind of one contrarian pocket that you're actively hunting as you go into 2026, and if you could maybe explain your rationale behind that.
Yeah, go to zero. So I'm not sure what goes fully like to zero. I think there's value in plays, but how it shapes will change. I think these generic, writing, summarization, a lot of enterprise knowledge, or search kind of things, I think a lot of them will go to zero individually. I think that the value of those features doesn't go to zero.
Yeah, but you then build them in-house, or there are
I
workflows
think
that you can
they
build. Yeah.
built in-house, exist within existing product suites. Maybe there'll be 1 or 2 of these just granola type, beautifully packaged products of that type, that there is a segment who want that best in breed. But I think that's a segment go to zero, or if we call it that, or just where I think there have been a bunch of funded companies over the last couple of years, because they've been quick, clear productivity gains for people, good traction, invest in a lot of investment. But I think a lot of those companies will struggle to find their continued fit in the world.
So probably less gone to zero, but plateaued essentially.
Plateaued. A lot of individual companies go to zero, but then the features will exist,
will persist,
embedded somewhere, or
sure.
2 or consolidate to 2 or 3. I think the foundational model layer kind of consolidates to that. While we're still in a world of high kind of high investment in expensive model development, a lot of capex. I think though the general models, I think we see two or three that dominate there. We see a small cluster of open source players as well, kind of define that side of the category, and then specialized models in kind of voice or image or different verticals, like cusp AI materials or whatever. But I think on the general intelligence layer, yeah, I think we already see it basically. There's two or three that kind of dominate.
Yeah. And anything that you are, I mean, maybe you don't want maybe you don't want to tell us, but anything, I mean, obviously you already haven't with the hardware, but anything that you are actively kind of pursuing that feels like an outside bet right now in terms of category rather than necessarily the business.
I think, I mean, we like a lot on the kind of industrial side of things. So this kind of intelligence layer that orchestrates across physical industry, so in manufacturing and logistics and energy utilities. So as I said, I think there's a lot that is interesting. Robotics is having a lot of investment, a lot of advancement, sensors and cameras and data capture. And so I think orchestration and intelligence for understanding physical environments, or orchestrating across different physical assets, tracking physical supply chains and workflows. I think there's a lot in those environments that is less sexy, less quick to kind of deliver value to, but is huge value.
Well, and stickier, right? Like, and equally, I think everyone forgets that 60% of the world, or whatever the number is, relies on manufacturing in one shape or like we live in a world of physical things, right? Like that's still cool. I mean, my family's background has been manufacturing across sub-Saharan Africa and elsewhere in the world. And, I know the difference between a really crap piece of manufacturing equipment versus a really incredible piece that is optimized and is of its at the top of its line. And this was before AI came in, right? So now if you can have AI essentially constantly monitoring, manually adjusting, you're getting precision further and further to the to the nth degree. Like, not only does that improve efficiency, it improves potentially waste reduction. So these all have like incredible impacts on bottom line and obviously allow you to kind of keep developing.
No, exactly. And I mean, just to our prior discussion, it was more kind of broad B2B apps and like the level of context that one can, bring in to automate workflows. And I think, what we're talking about here in like manufacturing and with a lot of kind of machinery and physical assets, I think you have a higher potential to provide intelligence with the full context of those workflows and then kind of fully automate those processes than in a lot of the other industries where there's a lot of
there's noise,
work
right?
done.
Yeah.
And there's noise, and there's a lot that isn't done in a machine or digitally. It happens offline and or in the heads of humans today, or in the conversations between humans. So it's a harder time to bring all the context to intelligence. But where we have machinery and physical assets and robotics and sensors and cameras and these things kind of already doing a lot of the work, I think, to build the infrastructure and solutions that can kind of provide full context to intelligent systems and begin to kind of bring greater optimization and autonomy to those kind of workflows. There you will probably be faster to a full end-to-end intelligent process.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, ultimately you can have your sensors. I mean, so firstly, those processes tend to be repetitive, i.e. it's the same process again and again every single day, every single minute, every single day. Whereas a human process will go, in a million different directions, and isn't necessarily repetitive all the time. And you can essentially set up your sensors to monitor that. Like, you don't even need to have an impact today. You can just have your sensors monitoring the workflow. And in a week's time, having gone through X iterations of having seen it, you then have sufficient data to be able to go back and say, okay, these are the process improvements, or indeed just embed that into kind of how those systems work. So yeah, I mean, I think that is super. I think that is super, both interesting and it's actually not niche, but it's probably niche in the world of. In the world of venture, where a lot of VCs aren't necessarily looking at that kind of built environment, or not built environment, the manufacturing process and operations. Emmett, I want to close off with a couple of questions that we ask all of our guests. I mean, this has been a really fun conversation so far, but I would love for you to tell us one thing that you have a contrarian conviction about from any area of life, whether that's work, politics, socially, or at home.
I'm not sure how contrarian it is, but maybe for a tech investor, I'm quite, I wouldn't say averse to tech, but I mean, I like to be quite tech switched off as much as I can be. I guess I hold the belief that I mean, we're animals, and we should stay close to the idea that we are animals, kind of biologically and evolutionarily refined for a different context to the one in which we live. And so I love the value of tech in a lot of contexts, but I also think that we feel much better the more we are away from it, and the more we move, are in nature, eat clean, use the breath, these sorts of things.
That's the Scandinavian. You should 100% listen to last week's episode with Jessica Butcher, MBE. So she founded Blipper, which is, or co-founded Blipper rather, which is one of the AR businesses back in the late sort of mid to late teens. But she's now dedicated herself to, she's founded a business called Scrollerware, which is basically, how to ensure that our children and ourselves don't get swatted up and digitally consumed. And exactly to your point, tech, and I'm very much the same, by the way. Tech is like hugely important to me and what I do and in my life. But equally, I try and be as analog as possible in as many ways as I can. I mean, like, one of the reasons I do this podcast is precisely because it allows me to have incredible conversations with people in real life, rather than, very, very fragmented and almost always unnuanced conversations on social media. So I think that probably is very contrarian for a tech investor, to be honest. And so finally, so we can get to know the real you, can you tell me something that moves you emotionally?
Probably, or the thing that comes to mind the most is when I'm playing with my young son, and kind of nowadays, he's so pure and joyful and full of love. He's 17 months old. So when I'm playing with him and I kind of take a moment to notice or reflect on just, I guess, the privilege of being his father, and what it is to, be a parent and care for a life, and kind of that real core of the human experience. I think that moves me. But I mean, to be honest, a lot of people would maybe consider me quite not cold, but maybe unemotional. But it doesn't take much to, I mean, a sporting event or a song or the right movie, and I can get quite emotional.
Look, I think that fits very well with your previous kind of contrarian take. I think, and I think, this is one of the things that I hear time and time again, and even again with this conversation with Jessica, one of the reasons that, she moved down this train of thought was she had kids, right? And I think it happens to all of us when we have kids. Like, you realize you are responsible for something that is outside of you in a way that you never have been in the past. And that is precious, and that is something that, you know, someone that you want to be connected with in ways that you otherwise wouldn't necessarily have felt the need to be. And I think it's lovely. And actually, you know, we've had a lot of guests come on saying very, very similar things, and that actually gives me a huge amount of hope, because if everyone, you know, if everyone came on here and said, you know, a movie makes me emotional, or the theater makes me emotional, or, you know, whatever, I'd actually be a bit more concerned. But I think the number of people we've had on who've just said, you know, yeah, when I'm playing with my kids, or my kid says my name or whatever, you know, that wells me up a little bit. I think that's absolutely beautiful. Emmett, thank you so much for joining me today. It's been an absolute pleasure. For our audience, where can they find you online? You're on LinkedIn, Twitter. Where can they find you on the internet?
LinkedIn is best. My tech version keeps me off Twitter too much, so find me on LinkedIn.
I think you've probably done very well in staying off. But Emmett, listen, thank you so much for joining me. It's been an absolute pleasure having you here today on Zoom, and really appreciate you taking the time.